There is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. Niccolò Machiavelli.
Every age imagines itself on the verge of renewal. The words change, reform, progress. They have the flavor of salvation, and people pronounce them as if they carry a sacred light. Yet beneath that light, an old darkness waits. The instinct to rebel is not born of wisdom, but of exhaustion. Men grow tired of the old forms, not because they understand them, but because repetition dulls the mind. The cry for change begins not in reason, but in boredom. The reformer feels this restlessness as a fever. He tells himself he is called by destiny, that his hands were chosen to cleanse the rot of his time. He believes that if only he tears down enough walls, the air will clear and truth will rush in. But human nature is a fortress of habit, and habit does not surrender to the idealist's trumpet. It digs its roots deeper the louder he shouts. Every revolution begins with poetry and ends in paperwork. The language of passion, freedom, equality, justice, soon turns into ledgers, decrees, and the gray silence of committees. The people who cheered the dawn now flinch from the daylight. They long for the shadows they once cursed. They discover too late that what they wanted was not transformation but reassurance. Not a new world, but a new version of the old one where their fears could still find familiar corners to hide in. To lead change is to walk a corridor lined with mirrors. On each side stand those who reflect back the reformer's dream with devotion, and those who twist it with suspicion. The faces blur together until he cannot tell which reflection is real. The danger is not the opposition of the masses. It is the moment he starts to believe that the applause means understanding. Crowds nod to survive. They cheer because it costs nothing. The reformer mistakes that sound for loyalty and steps farther out over the abyss. Those who endure the longest learn the art of disguise. They speak softly of improvement while moving only one stone at a time. They allow the past to breathe, even as they build the scaffolding of the future around it. Their strength lies in rhythm: advance, pause, retreat, advance again, until people forget the landscape ever changed at all. Real transformation is a form of hypnosis. It makes its subject believe he has always been as he is. The impatient reformer cannot understand this. His pride demands recognition. He wants the world to know who changed it. He mistakes speed for strength, purity for safety. But purity is brittle. It cannot bend without breaking, and once broken, it cuts the hands that tried to hold it. History remembers not the first voices that shouted for reform, but those who reshaped the system quietly, leaving no fingerprints. For the crowd must never feel conquered, it must feel convinced. In the end, change is not about courage, but choreography. It is a dance between illusion and patience, between what people think they want and what they can endure. The wise learn to guide that dance without stepping on too many feet at once. The fools sprint across the floor and wonder why the music stops. He believed himself incorruptible. That was his greatest flaw. In the years after the Bastille fell, France had drowned its old gods and was desperate to invent new ones. Amid the smoke of guillotines and speeches, Maximilien Robespierre rose like a priest without a church, offering moral clarity to a nation that had lost its sense of direction. He spoke of virtue with the fervor of a convert. His face, pale, severe, untouched by pleasure, became the symbol of a revolution that wanted to purify itself through terror. At first, he was adored. The people saw in him a man who would cleanse the corruption of kings and the greed of the aristocrats. But purity, once unchained, devours its own creators. Robespierre's vision demanded constant proof of loyalty, and every ally's hesitation began to look like betrayal. The revolution had no brakes, and he refused to build any. To stop meant to compromise, and compromise, he said, was treason to the Republic of Virtue. He began to speak less of freedom and more of enemies. To punish the oppressors of humanity is clemency, he declared. To forgive them is barbarity. It was logic twisted by righteousness, violence sanctified by moral purpose. Each week the guillotine sang, and each week its blade seemed to fall closer to his own neck. The power of reformers, once they taste blood, is never in reason but in rhythm. Robespierre's speeches became a drumbeat that silenced dissent. The same crowd that had cheered him now feared to breathe in his presence. Virtue had become tyranny. The man who demanded purity in others could not recognize the corruption of his own certainty. Revolutions rot from their moral center outward. They do not collapse because of lack of faith, but because of too much of it. Robespierre mistook movement for progress, execution for justice, and purity for truth. His committees turned suspicion into a virtue and mercy into weakness. When the terror reached its height, it no longer had direction. It was fire burning for its own pleasure. And in that fire, Robespierre's reflection began to blur. The end came not with a heroic stand, but with a whisper. On a humid night in July 1794, as his enemies met in secret, he slept, believing himself secure. By morning, his name was shouted in the convention, not as savior, but as tyrant. His voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. The orator who had terrified a nation found no words. Within hours, he lay bound, jaw shattered, awaiting the blade he had consecrated as an instrument of justice. The crowd that once lifted him now screamed for his death. The guillotine dropped, and with it the illusion that revolution could ever remain pure. The lesson is eternal. When you reform through destruction, destruction becomes your only form of reform. People will follow you into chaos until chaos becomes uncomfortable. Then they will demand order, even if it means the return of the very chains they once despised. The reformer who moves too quickly forgets that people cling to the past not out of loyalty but out of survival. To strip them of familiarity is to strip them of identity. Robespierre's fall was not the fall of one man, but the collapse of a principle, the belief that human beings can be remade overnight. Change imposed at knife's edge always ends with the blade turned inward. The wiser path is the one that bends but does not break, that dresses novelty in the clothes of the familiar. Those who forget that truth become martyrs to their own impatience. Some men conquer by storm, others by silence. Otto von Bismarck belonged to the second kind. He understood early what Robespierre never could, that power is not seized in a single act, but woven thread by thread until it becomes a net no one can escape. Where the revolutionaries of France had shouted their ideals into the streets, Bismarck whispered his into corridors. He mistrusted slogans. He preferred results. To him, history was not a battlefield of dreams, but a chessboard of timing. Every piece moved when sentiment and circumstance allowed it, never before. When he began his ascent in Prussia, Europe was restless with new philosophies. Liberals demanded constitutions, nationalists demanded unity, and monarchs clung to their thrones as if to fading stars. Bismarck stood between them, neither enemy nor ally, and spoke a language both sides could tolerate. To the king he promised loyalty. To the people he promised destiny. He reformed not by proclamation but by illusion, making every step of change appear as the natural continuation of the past. He once said, "Politics is the art of the possible." But what he meant was far colder. Reform is the art of appearing harmless. His strength was patience disguised as obedience. He expanded Prussia's army, altered its laws, negotiated alliances that contradicted each other, and allowed everyone to believe they had outsmarted him. In the parliament he argued with fury, but privately he poured wine for the same men he denounced, soothing them into complicity. Each reform he proposed came wrapped in the language of tradition. He did not destroy institutions, he infiltrated them. The aristocrats saw him as one of their own. The liberals mistook him for a pragmatic ally. Neither noticed the empire forming beneath their arguments. When he finally unified Germany, it seemed almost accidental, as if the country had awoken one morning to find itself whole. The brilliance lay in the fact that no one could pinpoint the exact moment when the old Prussia became the new Reich. Transformation had worn the mask of continuity. Bismarck understood that people tolerate change only when it arrives clothed in familiarity. He kept the old symbols, uniforms, rituals, titles, but drained them of their former meaning. The army still marched, the nobility still dined, the king still reigned. Yet behind their ceremonies he restructured everything. Power shifted quietly from divine right to bureaucracy, from sentiment to calculation. Those who opposed him did not realize the ground had moved until they were standing on air. His genius was not moral but surgical. He cut slowly, layer by layer, allowing the patient to survive the operation without noticing the wound. He never demanded faith in his ideas, only acceptance of his results. In this, he embodied the truth of Law 45. The world can be changed entirely if people believe it remains the same. By the time his enemies understood his design, it was too late. Germany had risen not in revolution but in quiet inevitability. No streets ran red, no monuments fell. Instead, the old order drifted into the new like a shadow fading at dawn. Bismarck's triumph was invisible. Its brilliance lay in the absence of spectacle. Yet even he was not immune to the final irony of reform. After decades of control, he too was dismissed by the very emperor his maneuvers had empowered. The young Kaiser wanted to rule in his own image, impatient for glory. Bismarck warned him that hasty change would undo everything built through careful deceit. The warning was ignored. Within a generation, the empire he had crafted slid into chaos. The old man's prophecy came true. He had built a machine of iron but handed it to children made of glass. And so the lesson returned. Reform too quickly and you invite ruin. Reform too slowly and you become irrelevant. The art lies in tension, not speed. The power to move while convincing the world you stand still. Bismarck mastered it, and his shadow still lingers over every leader who tries to command the storm without becoming part of it. Every century forges its own arena of power. Ours is not the palace or the parliament. It is the boardroom. The same drama plays out there, stripped of crowns and flags but charged with identical instincts, ambition, fear, and the hunger to leave a mark. The reformers of business speak a new language: innovation, disruption, culture shift. Yet beneath the slogans hums an ancient rhythm. They promise a future too dazzling for the present to recognize, and they forget that employees, like citizens, love improvement but loathe upheaval. The modern office is a nation in miniature. Its citizens cling to hierarchy and routine. Their daily rituals, the coffee break, the meeting, the predictable hum of tasks, are forms of emotional shelter. When a new leader storms in, tearing down the old procedures, he imagines himself liberating creativity. What he creates instead is panic. The rituals that once numbed frustration also contained it. Break them too quickly and the anxiety spills into revolt. History hides its coups behind euphemisms. When a company replaces a veteran CEO with a visionary half his age, the press calls it a bold transition. Inside the halls, it feels like invasion. Desks move, logos change, rules multiply. The reformer paints walls in new colors and rewrites mission statements while people whisper, counting how long they must endure before the next storm. Productivity declines not because the reforms are bad, but because every human heart resists unfamiliar rhythms. The wise executive, like Bismarck before him, performed surgery in silence. He begins with symbols, not systems, new words spoken through old mouths. He allows the veterans to believe the idea was theirs, the change merely an update. Gradually, the old habits die, not from decree, but from irrelevance. The staff still attend meetings, still file reports, still celebrate tradition, but within those traditions he has altered the substance. The form comforts, the core evolves. Every corporation dreams of rebirth, yet fears the blood of labor it requires. The successful reformer knows how to disguise revolution as routine. He changes the software but leaves the screen familiar. He introduces new ethics but dresses them in familiar phrases. We return to our roots. We honor our founding values. In truth, he is erasing those roots line by line, cultivating a new organism beneath the same bark. When disruption is real, not rhetorical, the market itself recoils. Investors behave like anxious subjects. They prefer predictable mediocrity to volatile genius. They punish change until it has already succeeded. That is why the prudent leader alters direction by degrees, first in perception, then in policy. Only when success becomes self-evident do they announce it as destiny fulfilled. The illusion is complete. The crowd believes it has evolved naturally. There is another type, the impatient revolutionary of commerce, who tries to rebuild an empire overnight. He abolishes departments, rewires culture, speaks in manifestos. For a season, he is celebrated in magazines compared to visionaries and prophets. Then the numbers fall. The workers, stripped of identity, sabotage unconsciously. Small delays, minor errors, polite indifference. Soon the visionary is replaced, his reforms quietly reversed, his name deleted from annual reports. The corporation heals itself by forgetting him. Change that endures must feel accidental. It must be slow enough for nostalgia to die without mourning. In politics, this wisdom is called statecraft. In business, strategy. In life, patience. The substance is the same. Do not humiliate what you wish to transform. The old guard must be allowed to survive long enough to bless their own extinction. That is the hidden mercy behind control. Those who master it become architects of continuity. Those who ignore it become cautionary tales whispered in conference rooms. The world applauds innovation but kneels to stability. The leader who can offer both, who builds tomorrow while convincing everyone it is still today, commands not only the market but the minds that sustain it. The stage has changed, but the law remains. Preach reform gently, cloak it in familiarity, and move the world without letting it feel moved. A system survives not only through laws and armies but through appearances. Continuity is the theater that calms the human animal. It tells people that life still obeys a rhythm, that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. Take that illusion away and fear rushes in like water through a broken hull. That is why every lasting power, kingdom, republic, corporation becomes obsessive about symbols. Flags, seals, uniforms, fonts, they are not ornaments, they are narcotics. The reformer who ignores aesthetics courts revolt before he begins. To change substance, one must preserve form. When an emperor adopts a new faith, he builds his temple on the ruins of the old one and reuses its columns. When a regime replaces a dynasty, it inherits the ceremonies and only alters the script. Even revolutions that claim to abolish ritual invent new rituals overnight. The human mind cannot stare at chaos for long. It demands a frame. In architecture, the lesson is obvious. Cities that rebuild after war never design purely new skylines, they keep the silhouette. A cathedral may become a museum, a fortress, a parliament, but the eye must still recognize its home. The builder who demolishes everything in the name of efficiency soon discovers that citizens wander their own streets as strangers. Disorientation breeds nostalgia, and nostalgia breeds counter-revolution. The politics of image is not deceit, it is anesthesia. People do not want truth in its raw shape. They want a version softened by familiarity. When the Soviet Union collapsed, every new republic kept the color red somewhere in its flag. They called it heritage. It was therapy. When companies rebrand, they keep a trace of the old logo, a line, a shade, a melody from the jingle. It tells the nervous customer, "You are still at home." The wise manipulator learns to choreograph these details with surgical precision. He announces great reforms with modest gestures. Same desks, same titles, same schedule. The air smells the same. The calendar continues, and within that repetition, he rewires everything. By the time people notice, their memory of the old order has already faded into sentiment. They say, it's always been like this, and mean it. Those who fail at this art commit aesthetic suicide. They replace symbols too soon. New flags, new anthems, new uniforms, all before trust has rooted. The public experiences vertigo. The leader looks different, speaks differently, demands new manners, and in that moment the collective mind revolts not out of ideology but out of loss. The familiar scent of yesterday was also the scent of safety. Strip it away and even progress smells of danger. The greatest masters of gradual reform therefore become curators of memory. They treat history as an exhibit that must remain lit even while the paintings are changed. They know that nostalgia, properly directed, is a leash. Give people symbols to love and they will forgive the changes that slowly hollow those symbols out. The past becomes decoration, not defense. Continuity is not the enemy of reform, it is its camouflage. A wise ruler understands that appearances are not lies but instruments. He does not announce a new world. He paints the old one in fresher colors and lets time persuade the rest. What begins as imitation ends as identity. Thus empires, companies, and families endure, not because they never change, but because they learn to look unchanged while evolving beneath the surface. Every transformation, no matter how righteous its intent, awakens its own resistance. It begins not in the streets, but in the whispers of those who believe they are defending the way things have always been. They are not villains. They are custodians of habit. But habit, once threatened, becomes warlike. It organizes quietly in corridors and back rooms under the pretense of caution. The reformer who charges forward believing he faces open opposition misunderstands his battlefield. The real enemy wears the uniform of loyalty. Resistance thrives inside the very machinery of change. The bureaucrat who delays one signature, the advisor who suggests further review, the friend who counsels patience, they are not obstacles by accident. They are instinct in human form, the body politic protecting itself from shock. And yet their obstruction can feel like betrayal. The reformer grows suspicious and suspicion becomes paranoia. The court of new ideas begins to resemble the regime it replaced. Power's deepest danger is not rebellion from below, but hesitation from within. Most revolutions die of inertia. The men who swear allegiance in daylight meet by candlelight to ensure nothing moves too fast. They speak the language of prudence while digging the grave of momentum. They remind the leader of risk, of precedent, of tradition. Each argument reasonable, each delay fatal. Their weapon is time. By the time their loyalty is doubted, their delay has already done its work. The wise ruler learns not to attack this resistance head-on. To purge it is to create martyrs of moderation. Better to seduce it, to make the resistors believe that the change they oppose is the very tradition they defend. Feed them illusions of safety. Give them roles in the new order that mimic their old ones. Let the guardians of the past become the custodians of its museum. Nothing disarms opposition like the chance to supervise its own extinction. History offers endless portraits of reformers who failed to recognize the enemy in their embrace. The generals of dying empires who thought loyalty meant obedience, the executives who promoted mediocrity to keep balance, the revolutionaries who trusted committees. They imagined that goodwill would outweigh fear. But fear is older than reason. To tame it, you must give it rituals. You must make the hesitant complicit in their own obsolescence. Every organization, state, business, family contains a silent majority devoted not to success but to familiarity. They will sabotage innovation not by attack but by suffocating it in procedure. The leader who mistakes their calm for cooperation is lost, yet the leader who declares war on them is doomed. The only victory is to make them forget that anything has changed. Allow them to perform their habits while you rewrite their meaning. Let them worship their relics while you replace the altar. Patience is the reformer's only shield. Time corrodes resistance better than force. The official who fights new policies today will defend them tomorrow as proof of his foresight. Memory is pliable. Pride is persuasive. When people fear change, they will gladly believe they desired it all along. The art is to survive long enough for that lie to bloom. In the end, the enemy within change is not merely bureaucracy or conservatism. It is the human need for comfort. To lead reform is to become both surgeon and therapist, cutting and consoling at once. If you forget the consoling, the patient will kill the surgeon. If you forget the cutting, the disease will spread. The balance is cruel, but mastery lies in cruelty disguised as care. Control does not mean domination. It means the ability to move a world that believes it is standing still. Every great reform begins wrapped in morality. It must. No crowd will follow a leader who admits he seeks power. They demand the perfume of virtue before they inhale obedience. Yet morality in politics or enterprise is a mask, not a map. It tells people why to feel righteous, never how to survive. Those who mistake moral theater for moral truth become the easiest prey of all. Human beings long to believe they are on the right side of history. They join causes less from conviction than from the need to feel cleansed. The reformer, intoxicated by their cheers, begins to see himself as prophet. He promises not improvement but redemption, not progress but purity. The more he moralizes, the less he governs. He starts performing virtue instead of designing systems. His speeches fill with words like justice, honor, integrity, vague, glowing terms that conceal the absence of direction. It is a pattern as old as civilization. When Confucius spoke of reform, he spoke in rituals and hierarchy, not revolution. He knew the people needed the scent of continuity even in morality. Machiavelli, centuries later, stripped the disguise entirely. He advised princes to appear virtuous, not to be virtuous, for the appearance pacifies far better than the truth. Between these two philosophies lies the corridor every ruler must walk, a careful hypocrisy that keeps the peace between conscience and necessity. The moral illusion functions as a currency of power. The public trades its obedience for the promise of righteousness. The leader pays this debt in ceremonies, awards, oaths, moral slogans, tokens that cost nothing yet buy peace of mind. Within that illusion, real change can occur unnoticed. Laws are rewritten, institutions reshaped, alliances formed, all beneath the canopy of doing the right thing. The crowd applauds the morality and overlooks the manipulation that morality makes possible. Yet morality, once unmasked, becomes poison. When people realize they were flattered, they turn vindictive. The reformer who preaches virtue too loudly invites the joy of scandal. His enemies need only expose one hypocrisy to shatter the spell. That is why prudent rulers keep their rhetoric cool, their promises modest. They act ethically in public while committing their ruthless acts quietly, leaving the conscience of the crowd unstained. The deepest lesson is that moral language is not evil. It is instrument. Without it, reform has no melody. With too much of it, reform becomes a sermon. The leader who survives learns to balance cynicism with grace. He speaks of higher ideals to lift spirits but roots his policy in reality. He allows others to feel noble while he calculates outcomes. The more people believe they are good, the easier it is to guide them toward what is merely necessary. Over time, even the illusion itself hardens into belief. Success makes morality retroactive. Once change prospers, history calls it justice. The survivors of revolutions always rewrite the moral narrative to paint their actions as destiny fulfilled. In truth, they were simply patient opportunists with a sense of timing. Their virtue was endurance, their ethics, discretion. To preach change is to risk becoming a saint. To execute it is to become a sinner. The secret lies in moving between both roles without losing the trust of either side. Let others claim purity. The master of reform knows that every moral crusade must end in compromise, and that the people will forgive the compromise if they are allowed to keep the illusion that they never compromised at all. Every reform ends where it began, in the fatigue of its own triumph. The new order, once established, hardens into custom. Its heroes become bureaucrats. Its language of liberation becomes the language of obedience. The crowd, weary of zeal, begins to crave the stability that zeal destroyed. In this way, history does not march forward. It oscillates, pulled by the gravity of human nature. The reformer who believes he can break that rhythm becomes its next victim. Change is never permanent because emotion is not permanent. The fervor that builds revolutions is a fire fueled by outrage and hope, both of which fade. Once the reformer delivers stability, he becomes indistinguishable from those he replaced. The public, remembering only its hunger for excitement, turns on him as it once turned on his enemies. It is not injustice, it is metabolism. Societies digest their leaders, extracting the energy they need, then discarding the rest. What survives is not ideology but method. The art of pacing transformation so that it becomes invisible. The masters of longevity understand that renewal must come disguised as tradition. The moment reform appears complete, they begin the next adjustment quietly, a millimeter at a time. They never declare victory, for victory invites decay. Instead, they cultivate restlessness without panic, continuity without stagnation. Their greatest reform is the illusion that reform is unnecessary. The impatient, by contrast, chase finality. They want closure, applause, proof that history has been conquered. They codify their vision into dogma and their tactics into ceremony. Their followers, deprived of movement, grow rigid, defensive, old. The revolution of yesterday becomes the conservatism of today. Sooner or later, a new reformer appears, promising to sweep away the very structures that once promised salvation. The pendulum swings again, not because people learn, but because they forget. The wise leader does not curse this cycle, he conducts it. He understands that power resides not in the revolution itself, but in its tempo. Like a musician, he shifts from crescendo to silence with precision. He releases just enough change to keep the public hopeful, just enough restraint to keep them calm. He allows dissent to breathe so that rebellion never has to be born. His gift is rhythm, not revelation. There is a cruelty in this wisdom. It demands patience in the face of injustice, subtlety in the face of chaos. But the alternative is ruin. Too much movement and a society tears itself apart. Too little, and it petrifies. Between these poles lies mastery, the ability to preserve equilibrium while the surface trembles. Real reform is a spiral, not a straight line. It circles old truths at higher altitudes, revisiting what it claims to have left behind. In private moments, even the most seasoned ruler feels the futility of it all. He sees how every generation replays the same drama under new titles. He watches youth denounce corruption, seize power, and grow corrupt in turn. He knows that civilization advances not through enlightenment but through exhaustion, that we change only when staying the same becomes unbearable. His solace is that understanding this pattern grants him a kind of immortality. He cannot stop the cycle, but he can ride it longer than anyone else. So the law stands complete. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once. Guide the current without damming it. Let people believe they are steering while you set the course. When the time comes to adjust, do it gently, in silence. And when they call you conservative, smile, for that word means you have succeeded too well. Because power in the end is not about destruction or creation, it is about duration. The world forgets who began each revolution, but it remembers who survived it. The rest is noise swallowed by the same tides that once promised to wash everything clean, like subscribe, comment, or don't. You are the master of your own life.